to the How to Spark Success podcast show. I'm your host, Liz Hamlet, and I'm a success coach, business mentor, and I'm also the founder of Spark Succeed. And I work with people to help turn their sort of spark of a business idea into a reality and get launched. And this is the podcast show where I have conversations with smart and savvy business owners and people doing really amazing stuff around the globe. So I'm delighted to have my first podcast guest here from Israel. And the guest today, he is fantastic and is going to have some great stories to tell. He is an author. He is founder of the Podbooker platform and Gefen Media Group. He's also a podcast host, so it's great to have him in the guest seat for a change. And his podcast is called How I Pick Your Brain. And this is all about interviewing billionaires and world-class leaders. So I'm delighted to welcome today Daniel Gefen. How are you, Daniel?
Woohoo! Yeah! Hey Liz, thank you so much for having me on.
Great.
Yeah. So it's not how I pick your brain, it's can I pick your brain, but it's fine.
Can I pick your brain? Sorry.
Can I pick your brain? It's fine. People say to me, Daniel, can I pick your nose? You know, I get all these stupid. Yeah. But it's funny because the name came because I thought of, you know, if I'm going to interview, let's say, high-profile business owners and you know, sort of world-class leaders, I kind of wanted a name that you would ask them if you met them on the street, you know. And what we do is, can I just pick your brain for a minute? Like that's what people say, so that's why I kind of came up with the name.
Yeah, and you've had some amazing people. I've had a look through your guest list, so you can tell us a bit about the stories and, you know, what sort of things you're asking them, because it's exactly right, you know. I know that I'm sure when you set up your podcast, you were very interested in just finding out what makes people tick, you know, their journeys, their ups and downs, and, you know, really what's been the catalysts to sort of their success. Yeah. That's why I was really keen to get you on and hear about your story. So do you want to tell us a bit about sort of the background, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's the long version and the short version. I'll try to do the short version. The long version, I can go for days. But I think essentially what happened was about 4 years ago, I was on a tennis court playing tennis, and someone called me up randomly. It was a total stranger, never heard of before. And they said, Daniel, I heard you have an interesting business story. I'd love to have you on my podcast. And I'll never forget my response, which was, what the heck is a podcast? It sounded so weird, like podcast, sounds like a spaceship. And actually, you know, 4 years ago, Liz, most people didn't know what a podcast was. It's only today now, everyone's listening to podcasts and producing podcasts. There's over I think it's 1.5 million podcasts now out there. And it's, you know, everyone all over the world now are listening to podcasts. But 4 years ago, I didn't know what a podcast was. And so he had to explain to me. And I got really excited because just to kind of give you a bit of, like, to paint the picture, at that point, I had a successful business that I launched. It was offline. I didn't have any social media following. I had no online presence. If you type my name into Google, I was invisible. Yeah. I never had any speaking, you know, opportunities or anything like that, unless you count me on a high school table, you know, classroom table, like, you know, jumping up and giving a little whatever and then getting detention for it because, you know, I'd always get into trouble like that. So I got very excited. I said to him, sure, I'd love to be on this podcast show. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? He said, no, you don't need to go anywhere. You could just be in your home, you know, wherever you want, really. And I said, okay, that sounds good. So I'm sitting there in my pajamas in my bedroom, and I put on this headset and I just started talking about my story and how I built my business and that whole journey. And you know what? I felt so alive. Like, I felt so natural. It felt so good, you know, to be sharing it. And the time just went by really quick, and it felt like 5 minutes, and an hour went by. And then the host said, well, you know, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I said, well, thank you so much. But, you know, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm just staring at a blank wall here. And I don't know, am I just talking to this guy and his mother? Like, who else is listening to this thing, you know? So I said to him, yeah, how many people are listening? And, you know, kind of in my mind, I thought, well, maybe he's going to tell me 20, 30 people, which would have been great, you know, fine. You know? But when he said over 1,000 people, I fell off my chair. I said, what? Are you joking? no way, 1,000? Are you kidding me? And he's like, yeah. I said, where are all these people? And he said, well, they're all over the world. And he starts listing all these countries. And I thought, oh my God, that's it. I need to get into podcasting. This is going to be huge, right? So 2 weeks later, I started Can I Pick Your Brain?
Yeah.
And like I said, the goal was to pick the brains of some of the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders in our generation. Well, there were two problems, Liz. Number one, I didn't know any successful business leaders. I had no contacts. I had no network, right? Number one. Number two is, how do I get people to listen to this podcast, right? I don't have any following online or anything. So what do I do? And that's when sort of that first aha moment, I had that first aha moment where I realized, hold on a second, that guy had over 1,000 people listening on, to me on that podcast, and I'm this nobody, right? So if he had me on his show and he had over 1,000 people, so then I'll just go on other people's podcasts and just talk about my story and then share my podcast with them, and hopefully they'll come and listen to my podcast, right? So essentially, I'm just going to leverage other people's existing audiences instead of having to sort of build my own and try to figure this whole thing out myself. Let them do the hard work. They've already built the audience, like I've done here now with Liz, right? Liz, you've done all the hard work. You've produced the episode, right? You're going to edit the podcast episode. You've built the audience. You're going to promote it, and I just come along for free. I don't pay any money, and I get free exposure to your entire audience, right? Sounds great. So that's what I did, and in a very short period of time, in less than 2 years, my podcast became a top-ranked show on iTunes. We got over 300,000 downloads, ended up interviewing 4 billionaires, the smartest man alive, the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI, the US memory champion, New York Times bestselling authors, and a whole host of other incredible guests. And then wrote a book, which became a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And this all happened just by getting booked on shows to be, being a guest on podcasts. So that's the first part of the story. The second part of the story is that then I started getting bombarded with emails from PR agencies and book publicists and people trying to get on my podcast as guests. I would turn down, I would say, about 95% of them. I would just send them to Stan straight away because they basically sucked. Like all of them, they were just two problems. One is they didn't have any relationship with me. They were just cold emailing me. Yeah. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who I was. They clearly had a very lazy approach. They didn't really bother to try to kind of, make a connection. And number two is they didn't know how to position themselves or their clients in the right way. So they all basically just sounded the same. It's like, oh, I got a great guest for you. He wrote a book and, he can help you with your business. And it's just like the same old. So a couple of months went by and I'm getting dozens of these a day. And one day I woke up and the light bulb went off in my head, which was, hold on a second. Like all these people are reaching out, but they're not doing a good job about it. And people are paying these PR agencies a lot of money to try to, get them on these podcasts. Well, I've got my own top-rated podcast myself. I'm friends with all these other top-rated hosts. I've been on over 60 podcasts as a guest myself, and I've interviewed over 150 high-profile guests. So I've got the connections. I know how to position a guest. I know what top-rated hosts are looking for in a guest. I've been through hundreds of really bad bios. So why don't I start my own podcast booking agency? And that's how Gefen Media Group was born. That was about three and a half years ago. And since then, we've got our clients on some of the biggest podcasts in their space. And then about a year ago, I suddenly had another light bulb moment where I realized that I'm only able to work with a select number of people because as an agency, there's only so many clients you can handle, number one. Number two is most people can't afford to spend thousands of dollars for an agency to get them on the top shows. But you've got hundreds of thousands of people that want to get on podcasts, but they just don't know how. Like where do they start? Where do they go? And on the flip side, I'm only working with the top 250 podcast hosts. Well, there's over 1.5 million podcasts. So you've got easily hundreds of thousands of podcast hosts who are looking for guests, but where do they find them? Because they're not getting pitched by the PR agencies because they're too small. So that's when I had the idea for Podbooker.com. And essentially Podbooker.com is a marketplace where anyone can go sign up for free, set up a guest profile and reach out to podcasts and get booked on their shows from the platform. And if you're a podcast host, you can have a podcast profile and you can easily find guests for your show as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's a really good idea, because I've spoken to a lot of business owners who are quite keen to sort of get in as podcast guests, and they've never really heard of any sort of platforms that will help them. They're trying to either sort of reach out individually, or, you know, and it's quite challenging. So, you know, and we met through the Podbooker platform, so it's great to have and I've my previous guest, Eric Thomas, was also through the platform. So, you know, I think it's a great way of, you know, putting out your podcast and yourself as guests to people that perhaps wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't have that connection with. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. And how's it been going? Because obviously, you know, I'm sure there's been a lot of new podcasts sprung up during lockdown.
Yeah, it's crazy. Oh, it's amazing. So far we've got over just around 1,000 users, but what's even more impressive about it is that we've had over 500 guest bookings on the platform in the last 2 months. Yeah, so it's been crazy. And I think it's because COVID, so now people can't really get to events, they can't do any sort of speaking engagements, they can't do any networking at networking events. So now the only real way to do it is through podcasts. That's the only way. And also because I feel like people are sick and tired of doing ads, you know, wasting money on marketing and ads. That usually it goes down the toilet, to be honest with you. And the reason why is because of lack of attention. You know, if you're putting, you know, ads on Facebook or Instagram, you know, you've got Susie sitting on the toilet till her thighs go numb, and she's scrolling through the feed and she sees your ad and she just flies right past it, and you just, you know, it's just, it doesn't really do much. Whereas on a podcast, you're getting someone's undivided attention, and over 85% of people that listen to podcasts listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. And the average podcast like this one is about 45 minutes, right? So now if you've got someone's attention for 45 minutes, that's incredible today, when the average attention span is less than a goldfish, it's 8 seconds. So I think podcast guesting is taking over from any other medium currently that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I saw recently was a TED talk, and it was all about, you know, what are the top 5 things that make startup companies successful, you know, when they're growing. And one of the things was timing. And I think, you know, you that's obviously a key factor in what you've done in your media group agency, as well as the podcast. So would you say that's been the biggest factor in your success, or has there been sort of other factors to play?
Yeah, you know, people say timing is everything, but it's not. It's a part of it. There's no question about it. It's a big part of it. Getting the timing right is great, but there's a lot more that goes into the pie. You know, if you just add flour, that's not going to get you much, right? You got to add the sugar and the water and the oil and everything else, right? And maybe some chocolate, you know, because chocolate, right? Got to get some chocolate in there. So I would say that timing is a factor, but persistence is huge. You've got to be persistent. You've got to keep going, not giving up. A lot of people give up too early, especially in, let's say, the podcast space, where, you know, a person might start a podcast and, you know, after 3 months, they might only get like 100 downloads, and they might think, oh, forget it, there's no point. Well, you know, I started a new podcast recently called Grow Your Show. And on Grow Your Show, I interview hosts who have hit over 100,000 downloads. Some of them, actually, I just recently interviewed someone who has over 3 million downloads. And, you know, they all said the same thing. They all said that the first few months, they were barely getting downloads. But as they started to just keep going, you know, more and more people started to listen, and then it started getting shared. And you never know when you get that one episode that kind of goes viral, and boom, then so you just got to keep at it. And, you know, the good news is, because most people don't have staying power, most people give up too early. Well, if you don't give up too early, then you now have a huge advantage over everyone else. So it's kind of like almost a marathon, right? If you run the marathon and you keep going, at the beginning it's going to look like there's a lot of competition because everybody's running, and at the beginning everyone's running fast, like, oh, like, come on, wait, I can win this, I can do this, I can do this. But then, like, after you get like 1 mile, 2 miles, like, you start to see that the competition is a lot less, right? There's less people there towards the finish line, and then it's just you and a few people. So it's just staying power, I think, is a big one. But talking about timing for a minute, I think it's very important to realize that if you're listening to this right now, the timing is absolutely incredible in the podcast space. And the reason why is because we're still so early. People say, oh, Daniel, there's 1.5 million podcasts out there. Maybe I've missed the boat. I've come in too late. I should have started 4 years ago like you did. And the truth is that, look at the statistics, right? There's over 100 million YouTube channels. Okay, do you remember when there was only 1 million YouTube channels? And I can imagine people going, "Oh, there's already 1 million. There's no point trying." You would have crushed it if you started back then. Now it's very saturated. But same thing with blogs. There's over 1 billion blogs out there. So 1.5 million, if you compare it to, let's say, 100 million YouTube channels or 1 billion blogs, it's like a drop in the ocean. Now it's like still the early days. So if you're going to start podcasting, you're definitely not too late to the game. You're actually, I would say, you're still early, and it's the perfect time. And as a guest, it's the perfect time. I'll tell you why. Because right now, podcast guesting is the most undervalued attention. And the reason why that is because there's still not that many people, relatively, that are going on podcasts as guests. And how do I know that? Because it's not saturated. Podcast hosts are not charging money for guests to be on their show. Now, why? Why is it that, Liz or any other podcast host who's spending all this time and effort building an audience, why are they not charging guests like me to come on their podcast? And the reason why is because they need guests, because there's still is a value in having a guest on the show. I believe that in the next 6 to 12 months, it's going to shift, meaning that there's going to be such a demand for people to be on podcasts as guests. The hosts are going to start charging because they're inundated with guests, so they don't really, they could be picky. They could say, oh, you know what, I'm going to charge, whatever it is, £100, £200, £500, £1,000, whatever it is. I know a host right now. 6 months ago, it was free to be on his show, and he has about 1 million listeners. Today, he charges around $3,500. So let's say around, I don't know how much that is in pounds, but even if we say, close to £3,000 just for one guest to be on his podcast. So that's going to get very expensive. I mean, imagine if you had to pay even £100, £200 per podcast you go on 10 podcasts, you've already spent £2,000-3,000. Well, now it's totally free to be on podcasts. So now is the time, if we talk about timing, now is definitely the time to be getting on those podcasts.
Yeah, I am totally an advocate for that, because I'm talking to people about, this is the time to show yourself as a thought leader, show your expertise, and have that more personable side of you put across, because, we can do things on LinkedIn or Instagram and, short videos, but, this is your chance to have a proper conversation and sort of really discuss in details those issues. So yeah, totally behind you there. And I would recommend Podbooker to anyone who's thinking about either getting some guests on their podcast or being a guest, definitely. So sort of thinking for you on a sort of weekly or daily basis, what are some of your success habits that really help you in your sort of working week?
Oh, wow. Okay. Success habits. First of all, be good to my wife, because if my wife's not happy, then nothing works out. That's number one. I've got 5 kids as well, so that's if I'm not spending time with my kids, then what success have I had really in life, right? So that's number one, most important. But then after that, in terms of my business, I think it's just trying to check off a list every day, like coming up with a list of things that I've got to do today, because it's very easy to sort of get overwhelmed by all the things that we've got to do. And for me, it's the simple things in life that I feel like create a lot of success over time. Yeah. So I just literally have a very simple to-do list. At the beginning of the day, I open up my to-do list and I write down, these are the things I want to get done, and I check them off as I go along. And at the end of the day, I look at it and say, okay, great, I did what I needed to do. Because we get distracted, right? So it's like 2 in the afternoon, I'm looking at a YouTube video, and then it's 4 in the afternoon, I'm like, why am I still looking at YouTube? Why am I still like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? I'm wasting time. So having a very simple to-do list in front of you that's visual I think keeps you on track. The other thing as well is doing things that are not necessarily scalable. So for example, everybody wants to kind of, hit the big time. And the thing is, there's no real shortcut to that, right? We think that if we just, get on the biggest podcast, then we'll reach like millions of people. But like, why don't you just get on 50 small podcasts? You know what I mean? Just get on 50 small podcasts and you'll get the big ones after that. Yeah. Yes, you can set up a whole thing and get an email list of 100,000 people, but like start with, how do I get 10 people to my email list today? Yeah. Like for me, for example, when I started Podbooker 2 months ago, it was only 2 months ago, already at 1,000 users. Yeah. And I didn't spend any money on marketing. I didn't do anything other than just, I went into Facebook groups. I found people who thought, podbooker.com would be benefit for them. And I just DM'd them. I just sent them a private message on Facebook, say, hey, Liz, you got to check out podbooker.com if you want to get on podcasts. It's, it's the easiest way and it's free to join. And do you know what? That's how I grew it. It's just every day sending 20, 30, 40 messages. I would sit on the toilet and literally, that would be, sorry for being graphic, but like whip out my phone and be like, okay, let's reach out to 10 people. Like, I'm not doing anything here right now. Like that's the kind of thing that you've got to do. And people look at entrepreneurs and they see success. They go, oh, they don't think that they're doing the little things, but it's the little things that get them there. Airbnb is a huge multi-billion-dollar company, okay, worldwide, global. I mean, Airbnb is huge. But if you look at the founder's story of how they started, they went knocking on doors. They went and knocked on people's doors and said, hey, we want to come and take pictures of your house. I mean, and it sounded crazy at the time. Like, who would let you in their house to like take pictures of their house? And who would think that they would let strangers stay in their home? Like, what a strange concept. But they did it, right? And they did it by doing things that weren't scalable. They did it by just knocking on doors and doing the hard work. Yeah. And then the other thing is giving yourself rewards every day. I think it's important when business becomes all about business and it becomes just about working hard, you burn out, right? People burn out all the time. And the reason why we burn out is because we don't take care of ourselves. So just going for a nice walk or, getting treating yourself out, whatever it is that you enjoy, you've got to make sure that you're doing those things and saying, I'm going to get, 10 more people, I'm going to get booked on 5 more podcasts, and then I'm going to go treat myself out to this. So, kind of giving yourself some goals, small goals, and then rewards along the way.
Yeah, and that's so important for that sort of longer term goal, to sort of chop it up and celebrate as you go. And like, just like you do with your sort of ticking off your to-do list on a daily basis, because, I know some, particularly, in setup of businesses, with a list, a to-do list that's like 7 pages long, and it's just, how are you going to feel like you've made any progress? So I think making it manageable is really key. And I really like what you said about the personalized approach, because we've all had things. I've had people, I've had a lot from PR firms now where they're trying to sell someone to go on the podcast. And it's very generic. It says nothing about the show, nothing about why they are a good fit for the show. And it's obvious that it is just a cookie cutter. So, I think that's obviously what has worked with you, helping to grow the Podbooker platform. If I had a personalized message from you to say, this is something new, check it out, it's quite interesting, it's a good time to be part of it. I would much rather do that than all the sort of salesy sort of copy and paste that you get through LinkedIn. So I'm totally on your page.
Yeah. It's true. A lot of people, when they do sort of reach out, they kind of get all markety. I don't know if that's a word, markety, salesy, markety. Just get to the point, like get personal, tell me how it's going to benefit me, and just, cut through the crap, if I could say that, just stop dancing around it. Just give me what it is. People reach out to me on LinkedIn, for example, they send me an email and they go, hey, Daniel, how are you doing? I noticed that this and that, whatever they're saying. I'm just like, what do you want? I know you want something. Just tell me what you want, because, it's just, And if it's not for me, it's not for me. It's okay. Like, you reach out to 100 people, and maybe 80% of them are not. It's not for them. So 20%, you've got 20%, and that's okay. You just got to keep doing it.
Definitely.
But what's in it for them is very important. Like to say, hey, I've got a platform called podbooker.com, and I want you to join. I haven't told you what's in it for you, right? So give me a list very quickly of why I'm going to benefit from it. So if you're pitching someone to be a guest on their show, tell them why you're going to be a good guest. Tell them what you're going to do for them. So, hey, I've got a list of maybe 10,000 email subscribers, and I'm going to share your show. Well, that's a box ticked in my book, because now you're going to help me grow my show.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and these are the things that I'm going to talk about that are going to be a perfect fit for your podcast audience, because I've actually listened to your podcast and I know what your podcast listeners want, and so this is what I'm going to deliver. Great, now you're actually telling me exactly what you're going to help my audience with. It might be something like, I'd like to have you on my podcast. So now there's reciprocity. Now you're giving me some benefit as well. Hey, Liz, by the way, I just reviewed your podcast. I love your podcast. I just left you a 5-star review on iTunes. Here's a screenshot. Oh, wow, Daniel, thank you so much. Like, just try to give more before you sort of just say, hey, I want to be on your show,
Exactly. Some great tips there, definitely. I'm going to check out your Grow Your Show podcast. That sounds amazing as well. Always love, I'm a big podcast consumer, and I find I sort of take in more, I think, than trying to plow through loads of articles or different things. And that's why it's so great to be part of, the podcast movement, definitely. So sort of thinking back over your business journey and sort of career, if you could start it sort of from afresh, what would you do differently?
Oh, wow, that's a hard question. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think when I was younger, I cared a lot about what people thought. So there was a lot of sort of fear around putting myself out there.
Yep.
Like I said, I would call myself an extroverted introvert.
Yeah.
And people say, "Oh, Daniel, you look like an extrovert." I'm like, well, I'm actually really an introvert, but I'm an extroverted introvert because I felt so uncomfortable in school, because I was sort of the nerd and I was bullied a lot, and I felt like I needed to prove myself. So I became this class clown, and I became this loud, extroverted personality, whereas it was not really naturally who I was. Naturally, I'm just sort of a quieter, just wanting to, have a connection, a really deep connection with people. But because I didn't have that deep connection, I kind of felt like I needed to overcompensate. And I feel like the best advice I could give my younger self, if I could go back in time, sort of, 15-year-old Daniel, I would say, look, what other people think of you is really nothing to do with you. Like, it doesn't matter what they think. Everybody's in their own world. Everyone's just trying to do what they need to do, right? You go into a room and the first thought you think is, what do they think of me, and how am I dressed, and how does my hair look, and how do I sound, and all these things. But the truth is that everyone's thinking the same thing. They're all going in there with the same thoughts, like, how do I sound, how do I look? So if you realize that and you recognize that, then really, if you just focus on everybody else and you just see, how can I make this person feel good, in terms of not just paying them a compliment, but really like listening to them and giving them the kind of attention that they desire, you become the most attractive person in the room. Because everybody else is just trying to get their own attention, and you're just giving them kind of what they need. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one of the best advice I would say. The second piece of advice I would give is, one of my guests, he was a billionaire that I had on my show, and I said to him, Jeff, you've made over $1 billion. There's only 2,000 people in the world that have done that. What's the difference between you and everyone else? And he said, Daniel, it's very simple. There's a sign up in my office and the sign reads, "Ideas are welcome here, but execution is worshipped." It's all about the execution. It's all about taking action. You can have a billion different ideas and you could talk about things all day long, but if you don't actually execute that, then it doesn't mean anything, right? You can think about having a great book, but if you don't write it, it doesn't exist. You can think about starting a podcast, but if it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. You can think about starting a business, but if it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. So it's all about taking the action. And so for me, when I was younger, a lot of what I was doing was consuming. I was listening to a lot of sort of audios. I was watching a lot of videos. I was reading a lot of books, going to all these webinars and seminars, and basically consuming, and getting just totally overwhelmed and overloaded. But I wasn't converting all of that into action. And so it was only when I started creating and started producing regularly, that's when I started becoming a lot more successful and seeing a lot more success.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that thing about sort of just being stuck in the ideas phase, because, you know, it's one of the things I talk about with, you know, there is no perfect time. You know, and part of being an entrepreneur is testing out different ideas, and they might not all work. But, you know, if you don't test them out, they just remain in that sort of brain of thought, and you know, you're not going to ever know. So I think, you know, just getting it started is key. Absolutely. So this is a good one to ask from you, seeing as the sort of type of guests you're having on your podcast. This is something I asked of all the podcast guests, but I'm very interested in your answer to this. So what's the best piece of advice that you've actually received about success?
Oh man, well, I think that was one of them. What that billionaire shared with me, really, I took that to heart. And the other piece of advice that I mentioned earlier about what other people think of you, you know, has nothing to do with you. That was actually another guest I had on my show as well. But another thing that someone said to me, because I told them about, you know, being a class clown in high school, and how, you know, it kind of, I went from sort of this happy clown to this sad, depressed clown, because I was kind of putting on a show for other people. And he said one line that really stuck with me. He said, you know, Daniel, you don't owe anyone a clown. And that really, really resonated with me, because I don't know why, but for some reason, we sometimes feel like we owe other people things that we don't. We don't owe anyone anything. We owe it to ourselves first. To take care of ourselves, and we, you know, at the end of the day, if we're not happy with who we are, then we'll never be able to help anyone else. You can't be there for other people if you're not there for yourself. I can't be there for my wife and my children if I'm not there for myself, if I'm not taking care of myself and I'm not in a healthy state. So then everyone suffers, not just me. And so instead of trying to sort of, you know, feel like I owe everybody else something, just recognizing the fact that it starts with me, and then it's my spouse, and then it's my children, and it's the people closest to me, and those are the ones that I take care of first, and everybody else comes after that. Once I've taken care of everyone around me that's close to me, then I'm able to go out and really help other people. Because you have some people who they go and they say, I want to impact the world. Well, how about impacting yourself first? Like, you know, impact your house. Like, there are people who are famous people who have, you know, impacted so many people, but you ask their wife or their husband, like, the guy's an absolute bastard at home. You know what I'm saying? Like, ask their kids, they're like, yeah, he was really great on stage, but man, you know, you should have seen him behind closed doors. That's the real key to success. Success isn't what you look like on the outside to the world. It's not the mask that you wear that you show everybody. It's really what's really going on inside. If a person's not happy with who they are inside, then they're not successful. I don't care how much money you've got in your bank account. I don't care what people say about you on social media. That's all BS. What do you feel inside, and what do your children say about you? That's the true measure of success.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic bit of advice. I knew we were going to get a good answer from you. So if people want to find out a bit more, where's the best place for them to go to?
So, I mean, it's free to sign up to podbooker.com right now. So definitely, if you've got a podcast or if you want to be a guest on podcasts, then podbooker.com is the place to go to set up your profile and start getting booked on podcasts and start getting guests booked on your podcast. And then other than that, they can also check out my new podcast called Grow Your Show. That's the best way to find out from other podcast hosts, how they grew their podcasts. And I think those are the two best places to go to.
Brilliant. I'll make sure the links are included in the show notes as well. Well, thanks so much for sharing all about the Podbooker and your journey, and the guests that you've spoken to and advice. It's been really, really interesting, and I will be following your other show with interest. And for the listeners here today, if you'd like to join me for the next episode, I've got another fantastic guest who is Thane Marcus Ringler. He is a former golfer turned speaker, a writer and a development coach, and he helps others to live and work better. And he's also a podcast host, so all the best people. And his show is called The Up and Comers Show. So if this sounds interesting, check out the next episode coming soon. And if you've been inspired by what you've heard today and you'd like to book in a call, then check out sparksucceed.co.uk and let's have a chat. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. And it's been fantastic to hear a bit more. And I no doubt see more of you on the Podbookers app.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate you having me on.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. Take care. Bye.
Bye for now.